Thank you, Kayla. Now I'd like to introduce the newsrooms that are co-hosting tonight's candidates forum. In addition to Contra Costa Pulse, which you can pick up this newspaper on your way out. We have UC Berkeley's Richmond Confidential, Richmond Side, and El Timpano. It's a collaborative effort that hopefully we'll do in the future. And we don't always do. Folks don't always come together, but we did this for y'all. Hopefully it'll help you get a little bit more informed about the candidates running in your district. I'd also like to acknowledge Richmond Side's Events Director, Becky Couch Alvarado. Hope I said your name right. Tonight's timekeeper, who is the hardest working woman in the debate business. And she's been doing a lot behind the scenes to make this happen. So thank you, Becky. So here's how tonight's going to work. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to introduce themselves. Our moderator will then present some questions submitted by Richmond residents and compiled by our journalists. Each candidate will have the opportunity to respond. Responses are limited to 2 minutes. We will then open it up for questions from you in the audience. Just raise your hand and we'll bring you a mic, or you can hand us one of the written question cards that were left on your chair, and you can read your question that way if you want to do it that way. If you need an extra card, just wave down one of the volunteers. Finally, we'll close it out by giving candidates the option of making a 2-minute final remark at the end. Y'all ready to go? Just want to remind you real quick, turn off your cell phone, vibrate, off, however you want to do it. We don't want any ringing during. Any questions from anyone? Anybody's birthday in here? I know it's that man's birthday right there. What's up, brother?
Happy birthday.
Put you on blast. That's right. That's my man right there. All right, I'd like to, if there's no other questions, I'd like to introduce and welcome the candidates and tonight's moderator, Ahmad Anderson, Sue Wilson. Thanks for being here. Looking forward to hearing both of you. And right now I'm going to pass it over to our moderator, Carrie Hulak, who's the editor-in-chief at Richmond Side. Carrie, you ready?
Ready, Malcolm.
All right, y'all. Thank you.
All right. Well, welcome again, everyone. Before we begin, we ask the candidates to respect one another's time and to not interrupt. We also ask that you follow the rules of civil discourse, keeping your tone non-confrontational and your language respectful. All right. And as Malcolm said, we will start out by allowing each candidate 2 minutes to introduce themselves. And I'm a big believer in the alphabet. So Ahmad, we'll let you go first.
Yeah, that's been tough for a long time in my life with the name of Ahmad and Anderson. Ahmad Anderson, and welcome here to the forum. I'm running for city council, and some may say this is something that is no surprise. My mom and dad served as mayor and city council person here as well, but Ahmad has served the community for over 40-some years. On the Economic Development Commission, which I think is a concern for the city. I've worked with the Youth Service Bureau around youth, crime, and violence. I've worked with the child care councils here around child care for families, for working families. I've also been involved in the community talking to our youth about careers as an HR director for many of the logistics companies, especially UPS on the Hill. I hired a lot of folks that came from the city of Richmond, started as package handlers, going to drivers, and now supervisors and managers. I've lived here all my life, but living here all my life is one thing. But I've proven and demonstrated my leadership by being involved, not just in District 5, but throughout the city. When I first ran for city council in 1985, it was citywide. In 2020, it was districts. But in between that time, I ran for the BART board. So understanding the need to getting folks out of their cars, getting folks to the stores, getting throughout the community safety has been important. Also, as it relates to the funding, not where I stand, because some of the areas that you're sitting right now are the most impacted. And more importantly, we need financial responsibility. I have those skills as someone's worked in both nonprofit, educated in business, but I am Richmond's native son, and I want you to come alive in District 5. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Sue.
Hi, my name is Sue Wilson. I was born in Detroit. My mom is a nurse and my dad worked for the utility company. They are now both retired and living comfortably off of pensions and Social Security. In contrast to my opponent, no one in my family has ever run for public office, including me. But like him, I am very grateful to my parents for the sacrifices they made to put my brother and I on a good path. I graduated from the University of Michigan and I came to California 25 years ago to get a PhD in anthropology from UC Berkeley. But while I was at Berkeley, I fell in love with labor unions. I became a member and then an elected leader of UAW 2865, which represented academic student workers. Since then, I've spent close to 25 years doing every possible job in a labor union. I've negotiated contracts for teachers and doctors and nurses. I've organized new unions. I've done political work and communications work. I learned a lot from those jobs and also from managing other people and training them to do the jobs as well. Since moving to the Richmond Annex 18 years ago, I've been involved in a number of campaigns here in Richmond, usually as a volunteer. I have helped with campaigns for rent control and eviction protection, for cleaning up the toxic waste on our shoreline, for taxing large corporations at an appropriate rate, and for advising, I also advise non-corporate candidates and campaigns. For too long, our city council was dominated by corporations, especially Chevron, so I accept no corporate contributions to my campaign. I'm endorsed by our current county supervisor, John Joya, our mayor, Eduardo Martinez, and a majority of the current city council, including incumbent Gail McLaughlin, who's not running again. I've also received endorsements from dozens of independent organizations dedicated to environmental justice and affordable housing, along with many local labor unions. They trust me to do what's right on the issues that matter to Richmond most.
Thank you. Okay, the next questions were compiled by our journalist, and they were also submitted to Richmond side from some of our readers. And as the same time limit applies, please keep your responses to 2 minutes. All right, let's jump in, and Sue, we'll have you take this question first.
I'm
So-
ready now.
As
Sorry,
soon as you get your glasses on.
my glasses disintegrated, so now I can see you. It's going to be a better experience for me at least. Go ahead.
Illegal sideshows, as illustrated recently by the incident at the Hilltop car dealership, have long been a problem in this district and citywide. Do you agree with how the city and police handle sideshows, and what new ideas would you have if elected?
Thank you. Yeah, sideshows are a problem, a regional problem. I think many of the communities in the Bay Area, including Oakland and Berkeley, struggle in the same way that we do with sideshows. I think we need to approach it as more of a regional solution, since it is a regional problem, and focus on enforcement, but also engineering solutions to make many parts of our city, which are currently very, very attractive sites for not just sideshows, but other kinds of dangerous driving. There's all sorts of things that we can and should be doing to change the physical layout of those places, and also to put things like cameras and monitoring, devices so that we can actually enforce the laws. We have plenty of laws on the books that make this sort of driving and behavior illegal. I think our police are doing what they can to enforce it, and I support the enforcement of the existing laws. But I do think that really making a difference is having that regional solution can make a difference. And also, I think, to sort of step back from the issue, giving our young people more not necessarily productive, more safer entertainment options for the ways to spend their evening. I do think it's related that there's certainly not much alcohol-free stuff for young people to do in the area. And if they had more alternatives, maybe at least some of them wouldn't be hanging out watching this dangerous practice.
Thank you. Ahmad?
Yes, so it is regional, but let's talk about what we've done here at home. What we did almost a year ago in July was we tabled it for study. What we did here a year ago in July, what we said was a cultural issue. What we did here in July was the mayor abstained on voting and stated that there are probably more senior citizens who drive faster on the street than the sideshows. Sideshows bring about drug trafficking, sex trafficking, human trafficking, illegal guns, drug trade. We have found people that were killed and murdered at those sideshows. We had a Richmond police officer assaulted here during a sideshow. It'd be fine to have the technical well-being for cameras and monitoring and license plate tracking, but we have defunded the police, so they do not respond as well presently. So why would they have the energy and the wherewithal to track these folks outside? I've not heard any discussions from us here, other than thinking at one point it was stated that we would put them in an area where they could do this sideshow because it was a cultural piece. Unfortunately, if we took the same type of steps to address boycotting Chevron or pickleball and recognizing sideshow is not a recreational sport, that needs to change immediately.
Thank you. Ahmad, Ahmad, I'll let you have the next question first. The city has made efforts to address homelessness in Richmond, for example, setting up an SOS respite center in the district and dismantling some camps and urging unhoused residents to get help. How would you address this issue if elected?
I think one of the things that needs to be addressed is that you cannot aggregate unhoused folks. There are unhoused folks that have jobs. There are unhoused folks that have skills. There are unhoused folks that don't have skills and have disabilities and behavioral health issues. It is a regional problem, but we need to be able to ascertain and work with folks like Goodwill on how we can put in place the things that I've done as a director or vice president of human resources at Goodwill East Bay, working on training and developing folks, being able to address the housing crisis by building affordable housing, working in those capacities to put those who have jobs in those houses, those who have skills, finding placement for those individuals, and then working as they have done in San Jose specifically, and in places like San Antonio, where they have made it a mandate to look at how you not only develop the skills, but address it from a public health issue with your regional bases, with your county health, with your city environmental health department here, and look at how we can get the funding with our state and federal to be able to address that. These are discussions that have been in myself for 10 years where I worked at the Goodwill Institute of the Greater East Bay, putting folks into workforce development programs, folks with dental and mental health and medical benefits. This is something I have experience with and would be able to collaborate with the partners I have throughout the county and the state.
Go ahead, Sue.
I think I'm going to end up saying this a lot tonight, but here we have another regional problem that I think needs to be addressed through regional solutions. I do think I agree with Mr. Anderson on many of the points that we do need to build more affordable housing, and we do need to seek out state and county and federal funding to help with transitional housing so folks who are living in their vehicles have a place that's better for them and better for the community than folks living out on the street. But I think I may diverge from him in policy in that I think that the most effective way to address homelessness is to keep people from slipping into homelessness in the first place. And as a city, we have the opportunity to set policies that do that. Most important of those are rent control and eviction protection, which is something that Richmond has and that I've worked to both support the creation of and strengthen in the past. I agree that a lot of folks who are homelessness or near homelessness are good working people whose jobs don't pay them enough to pay the rent. And the little bit that we can do as a community to keep the price of rental housing affordable. 50% of the people who live in Richmond are renters. And these folks need us to be strong supporters of the existing rent control ordinances that we have if we want to keep them in their homes and keep them in Richmond.
Thank you. Sue, it's your turn to go first. So I'll start with you with this next question. This comes from a Richmond Side reader who wrote to us saying she's concerned about the overwhelming number of broken down vehicles in the district. She says they're populating local streets, yards, and driveways, and she notes that junk-ridden neighborhoods can invite more crime and dumping. How would you address this issue?
Yeah, so I think I look at it as an issue that's broader than just abandoned vehicles. I think it's generally a question of code enforcement, of making sure that our neighborhoods are looking and operating the way that we want them to. There's sort of, I think, a two-pronged approach. One is that, and this is not an insult or a criticism of city staff, but I think the city in the past has been pretty tragically underfunded in these departments, that we don't have enough people going out to enforce and investigate and make sure that these problems are taken care of. The good news is that the city council in the last 3 months has managed to reach an agreement with Chevron, where Chevron's agreed to pay an additional $50 million a year in taxes. And I think that part of that tax money needs to go to improving city services, including code enforcement. The second piece of it is that a lot of times when somebody's falling short of community standards and how their house looks, how their yards look, it's not through a lack of interest or desire to fulfill those expectations, but a lack of money or a lack of physical ability to do that. So I'm endorsed by the Richmond firefighters, and I've talked to some of the firefighters about this idea that they've used in other cities, where cities and nonprofits can provide sort of a lifeline to folks who need either financial assistance or actual physical assistance in taking care of their properties. So I do think we should have more city staff to enforce that better, because I agree. Like, I want to live in a Richmond and a District 5 and a neighborhood that's beautiful. But I also want to be humane about the fact that it's challenging for some folks to keep up their properties. So I want to provide some support for that.
Okay, go ahead, Ahmad.
I'd have to say to you that one of the challenges is the lack of staff to be able to address the crisis that we have for people just abandoning their cars, setting up auto body shops there, the garbage in the streets as well. Yes, there's a need for compliance around that as well. But we have been understaffed. But you know that economic development is the engine to providing tax revenue and staffing. And that staffing cannot just hope and wish that what we now receive from Chevron will be the end all. There needs to be implementation, and needs to be administration and clarity as to where that money will go. It sounds good, but if we had the wherewithal or the diversity of thought leadership previously, we would not be banking on Chevron. We would have balanced that out. I've said this before, that when you are thinking about being financially responsible, you have to think about what areas are impacted the most. The areas that are impacted the most of where we're sitting, that are deprived of those services, are where we're sitting right now. It's not in the marina, but they have their fair share of what they need as well. It's not in the annex, but as those of you who may not live here, if you drove down Cutting, the only time we see this type of attention is during the election. We need to be able to bring economic development that provides the proper staffing, hold staff accountable, and do the compliance necessary. If not, then we'll continue to reap the problem we have of abandoning cars, the poor maintenance of yards, and they will not become healthy and they will not become clean. And use our services with youth to be ambassadors to help our neighbors. We have that program presently in East Shore with the East Shore Park Boys.
Okay, the next two questions were sent to us by readers and they were directed at Sue, but Ahmad, you will be free to answer them as well if you wish. So I'll go ahead and start with you, Sue. I had a question emailed from a Marina Bay resident concerned about crime. They say that the Richmond Progressive Alliance, which is backing your campaign, is anti-police. And they ask, will you pledge your support for police officers? And what actions will you take to support and empower our police?
I'm going to answer this a little differently, maybe, than pledging my support for police. I will say that my view on public safety and reducing crime is holistic in the sense that I believe that police are part of that solution, but only one part of that solution. And so what I pledge is that I'm going to put my attention and city resources into pursuing more and varied plans to reduce crime and increase public safety. The police, and just to reassure people, the police are part of that. Right now, the city police take between 35 to 40% of our budget every year, and it's expensive. We need them. We absolutely need them, but we need to supplement their activity with other sorts of city workers who are focused on making the city a safer place for everyone. I am very excited about the Office of Neighborhood Safety, which is a program in which very experienced people go in and work with folks who are likely to be either victims or perpetrators of violence and help really reduce the violence in our community. I'm equally excited about a new program that is hopefully launching soon, which is to have a community crisis response team that can send trained mental health professionals to answer calls that are related to mental health or other sorts of crises where you don't really need an armed officer to respond. And so I do pledge my commitment to public safety, but again, I want to emphasize that I think police are a part of it, but not the only part.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say that defunding the police is a non-conversation for me. I've lived on the South Side, on South 17th Street, South 18th Street, near the Panhandle, 1131 South 55th Street, and now live in Laurel Park. Throughout the country, defunding the police has hit the most impacted communities, underrepresented, people of color, lower socioeconomic communities, the places where crimes and murders take place, with the places where property crimes take place. To remove them is a disservice to us. In the polls that were taken here in the city of Richmond and throughout the state, there was a yes, we want a change in how we're dealt with. We want the respect from the police department. We want community policing that understands the culture of the community. I don't need you as a police officer to live here, but I do need you to understand where you work and how that relationship developed in this community. I think it's important to understand if we want to grow our city responsibly, to increase economic development, other than depending on Chevron, if you will, because they do have now 47%, 45 to 57% of economic revenue here. You need to show folks that you're willing to support the small businesses, that you're willing to help folks move from the unhoused areas that have skills to jobs, and be able to show that police are available, that will mind your streets and be able to look after them who have forced overtime, poor morale, poor performance, poor productivity, and high workers' comp, and they leave. We have to be able to work together to make this work. So I do pledge to step it up and step in as a representative on the city council.
Okay, one more question, and this actually is just for Sue. And then audience members, this is your heads up to get your questions ready because we'll be going to you next. Sue, the question is, since RPA council members have gained majority control, they voted according to that platform, even when it might not be what the majority of constituents have wanted. Since you're aligned with the RPA, what are you offering that's different from what we have?
Oh, so it's a difficult question to answer because I think it starts off with an factually inaccurate statement. So let me address that first. It is not true that the policies that the progressive majority on the city council has been pursuing are inconsistent with what the majority of Richmonders want. The reason that the majority of Richmonders elected these folks to office is because the proposals and the policies that they're upholding are the things that people in Richmond care about. I'm talking about rent control, talking about eviction protections. I'm talking about making Chevron pay its fair share of taxes and making other large corporations also pay their fair share of taxes. All of these things are policies and approaches that most Richmonders agree with, even if the person who wrote this question thinks they were the wrong way to go. So I don't think when I I try to be very transparent, and you're going to ask me questions tonight about my policies, and a lot of my answers are going to be, yes, I agree, and no, I don't. I'm happy to do that. But again, it's not because I'm reflecting any organization's views of what's right for Richmond. I knock a lot of doors here. I make a lot of phone calls. I've done it for 10 years. And I really try to listen to folks and really sort of meet them where they're at and what they want. And that's what I'm going to bring to City Council is a continuation of those efforts to make policy that fits the will of the majority.
Thank you. All right, it's time to go to questions from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we can bring you a mic. All right, great. We're off to a good start. If you'd rather write it on a card, hold your card up and we'll collect them. So mic runners, we're ready for you. We just ask that in the interest of time, get to your question quickly.
Hi, my name is Michael. I live in Marina Bay. Thanks to both candidates for running because we really need civic participation. You guys are awesome for doing it. My question is, Ahmad, you talk about being concerned about defunding the police and the effects that that's had. And Sue, on the Marina Bay Neighborhood Council call a few weeks ago, you talked about the perception of defunding the police being sort of misled. And you've also talked about the police taking between 35 and 40% of the city budget. Ahmad, if we're already spending that much on the police, like how are we going to afford spending more? And Sue, like, why doesn't it seem like this plan to move into crisis response is working?
So the money, the people have been saying the money's coming from Chevron. And as an HR professional, I know that, first and foremost, if you look at $55 million a year, if it's 40% today, 45%, benefits go up almost between 8 to 12%. So look at that when you first talk about, gosh, I just won the lotto. What bills do I already have to pay? I have a $78 million deficit. So I would imagine that that's going to decrease, that's going to increase on your health and welfare for your police department and just benefits and other things that take place. So there's the hiring process, there's the recruitment, there's the training, and that goes up. The crisis response piece right now is the two crisis response employees, are they at the ratio you need based upon our northern, central, and southern district and the crimes of issues we have? I think it's important to show the transparency and the data where we're having those issues. You can't tell where the crisis issue may come up, but you do know where the crime is. If you have more than one situation, are they going to be able to go across the city in the same way to address those needs? And we don't have officers to address those needs. So it needs to be played out. It needs to be able to be shown. in some presentation about the impact and assessment of the value of such a program, which I believe is valuable. But I think based upon the needs we have here, we need to increase not only the headcount for officers, but also the crisis prevention unit as well.
Excuse me. So, all right, hello. This message is for.
Sorry. Oh, I believe
Yeah, I was-
Sue,
I
yeah, I
wanted to
believe
answer.
Sue.
Sorry.
Opportunity, sorry.
Part
It's my
two.
fault.
So one of the things that I've been spreading the word on in my campaigning is the point about police budgets. If there's one takeaway that you take away tonight, I hope it is this, that Richmond has not and has never defunded its police department. The current budget of the Richmond Police Department is $87 million. That's about 36 for next year. That's about 36% of the budget for next year. If you look at the last 10 years, they've consistently made between 35 and 40% of the budget has gone to policing. There's never been a defunding. And nor do I think there should be a defunding, but there's a pernicious rumor there that because a couple $1 million out of, I think $3 million out of a $60 million budget was moved from unfilled positions to another department, safety related, 3 years ago, there's this rumor that, oh, they got defunded. A $3 million cut on a $65 million budget is not defunding. It's a prudent financial budget balancing activities that happen to every department in the city every year. So please, shouldn't be an exception to that oversight. I do think that our current police force is important, and I want us to have enough police officers, but they are extremely expensive. People don't realize that the average police officer in Richmond, not their cars and their stations, but just their salary, benefits, and pension, or the salary, benefits, and overtime, the average officer costs the city $375,000 per year. So that means to me, the debate isn't, do you feel safer with more police officers or fewer officers? The simple fact is no city can afford anymore to have enough police officers to provide all the things that we need as a city to stay safe. So I do think we have to really invest in programs. Certain things, we need a police officer with a gun and a badge, but for the ones we don't, we do need alternatives like the Office of Neighborhood Safety and also the Crisis Response Program.
So what could Richmond do to attract more medium and larger businesses to come to Richmond to stay, so we're not so dependent on Chevron?
I think what was just mentioned, and Sue mentioned that we may not have defunded the police department, but we haven't hired an adequate enough amount. In addition to that, we have forced overtime. You have forced overtime when you don't have the proper staffing. If you have a city that is not addressing the crime in the city that you have, and I know it's been said that crime has gone down, but folks are not reporting, and we know that that's a national statistic. Folks have not reporting because they're not getting the attention they need. However, they are providing information to the insurance companies about what is taking place. It has been reported in hospitals that has been taking place. So those issues are of great concern. In addition to that, when you clean up your neighborhood, when you bring in additional businesses, they want to know, are our officers, are our families going to be safe? Are our workers going to be safe? How do you know that? We see throughout the Bay Area, police sitting by their own city workers to ensure they're not robbed, or postal workers are not robbed. So if I'm having that happen in my city and I'm a business person, what would encourage me to bring my city there? I think it's a twofold prong. You make sure you're inviting the right business. You make sure you can ensure that they can be safety to their best ability. And then you work collectively in introducing a program that will encompass what it means to work here, live here, play here, and thrive here in a safe community.
So in order to entice more small and medium businesses to come to Richmond, I think we have to address what I think is a serious PR problem that we've had as a city. I do think that Richmond is saddled by a reputation that was maybe true 20 years ago. It probably was a simplified, overly simplified 20 years ago, but certainly is not true today. Hopefully most, like crime is falling in Richmond. The air is getting cleaner. We are doing a good job of moving things forward and making this a more desirable place to live and work. We have not done a good job of spreading the word that Richmond is a good place to live and work. And so I do think with the additional money that we have now from taxing corporations at an appropriate rate, I do think a lot of that, not a lot, it's a lot of money, some of that, a reasonable portion of that needs to go towards really putting together a marketing plan for the city and giving it to folks who have, I don't have this experience. This is, not my life experience, but there's those who know how to go out and do that. In a more concrete way too, I think we really have to approach the folks who are already running small and medium businesses here and talk to them about like, what can we do as a city to make you successful, to keep you successful? And, what makes a difference? Like, again, my background is not in developing small and medium businesses. So I need to go to the people who have that expertise and really listen to them about what they need and what they want. I'm an anthropologist by training. I don't work as an academic, but what I'm good at is going up to folks and really sort of picking their brains and coming away with some stuff that I think will be useful for the city. So I plan to put my ethnographic skills to work, I guess, in order to help the city develop a plan.
Hi, this is a question for Ahmad. The AstraZeneca site qualified as a Superfund site. Jim Levine covered it with 4 inches of concrete and proposed building 4,000 units of housing. Well, that's about 10,000 people on a potential Superfund site. You have supported that. Why do you support putting 10,000 people on a toxic waste dump?
I'm not sure where you saw I supported that at any point. If you could tell me why I supported that, I'd appreciate it. But as the Economic Development Commission, I did not support that. In fact, I used to play on that site when they actually did the testing of agricultural products. I'm an asthmatic today. I live in that community where most of the folks I know grew up. I would not support that. I've never supported it, building in that site in that area on toxic waste. I have attended committee meetings at DTSC since probably 2016 or a little bit earlier. No, that is incorrect information. I appreciate the question, but that's wrong. I have not supported and would not support it.
All right, I'd like to, could I answer that as well? Up to you, okay.
On December 1st and December 15th, 2020, in public comment to the city council, you spoke in favor of the city council adopting the cap and build plan for the AstraZeneca site. I believe the exact quote you said was do it for the South Side because you were interested. There was a community benefits agreement that was attached to accepting that deal and recommending a cap and build plan of that housing. And so I've recently heard the 2 public comments that you made on that. On the other hand, I have been consistently since 2020 opposed to the plan to cap and build at the AstraZeneca site. We know that sea level is rising, that our groundwater is rising, and whatever toxins are in that dirt are going to spread, including to the Crescent Bay apartments that are right across the road. And certainly, I don't want to be living in the housing built directly apart on top of it. So I think as a city council, we need to revisit that plan and really push for a full cleanup of that site. After which I think we also have to ask serious questions about, even once it's clean, whether we should be building thousands of units of new housing that close to the water, given that sea level rise is going to claim that within a couple of years.
And you're absolutely correct. And I did say I would support that because of community benefits. But as Sue has just mentioned, if it was fully cleaned up, then I would make sure I would address that issue, because I know that there was a development plan, which I learned of later, that I was concerned about, which they shared additional information about the surrounding areas that would not allow until the proper testing. The most recent testing showed that there has been some mitigation, but it is ongoing. And if that's been going on since 2016 and we're standing here today, I would not support that. I spoke on that in 2020, absolutely. But today, I would not do it. So I want to be very clear, that was part of the statement, but not the entire statement. So thank you, sir, and thank you, Sue.
All right, I'd like to do some of the written questions for a second. Let's see, we'll start with Sue. What does a balanced city budget look like? And what is your relevant experience that would help move Richmond closer towards that?
A balanced city budget is one in which we are taking in equal or more revenue than we are spending, but while we're still providing adequate city services. Like, you can have a balanced budget by saying we're going to keep city services so low, and then we balanced it, but it's not really an adequate approach to budgeting. So for me, the thing that I bring to the table that I think the existing city council has done well as well is that we have to look at the revenue side of our budget, because we know what our needs are. There's almost endless things that we can spend on that Richmond would benefit from, but we really need to continue to drive revenue. And I know it's controversial, the idea of taxing corporations at a higher rate in order to pay for city services, but I'll remind you to look at this from a historic perspective. When my parents were my age, the rate at which corporations in the United States were taxed was much, much higher than it currently is. And that's when America had a middle class and thriving cities, including Richmond. And so I think that the current approach that the city council is taking, which is to require large corporations, including Chevron, to pay their fair share in taxes, is one that I will bring that energy to the city council and a commitment to following through with that.
Go ahead, Ahmad.
If if the engine for developing revenue for your city is economic development, we failed. We failed here. If the method of Measure U was to be able to provide the additional revenues, there's not been transparency of how that money's been used or where it's going. I believe that Measure U should have been a tiered approach. So you didn't have you get the giant, if you will, but it did not have the side effect or the repercussions to smaller business that we have not been able to retain here. I think it's important to look at it and reassess the impact of that. It's important to look at a budget that we've not had the financial fiduciary responsibilities. I've said, folks, when you're elected, you go through training in the League of Cities around financial responsibilities. But yet and still, we have a deficit of 78 million, which means we're not doing our fiduciary responsibility. We're not attracting economic development at a variety of different levels. Look, I'm an HR guy. We do budgets all the time, from hiring to talent to recruitment to health and welfare benefits. I have those experiences. I've had a small business. I know the impact. But in addition to that, when I don't know the information, I lean on the staff, the subject matter experts, on what they should do and how they should do it as well. And when I don't know, I go to Barnes and Noble, which isn't here anymore, and get the HR for dummies. We need HR for financial responsibility, for the responsibilities of taking care of our city and making sure we can balance budgets here in this city.
Audience?
Hi, my name is BK and I'm a resident here. And I've heard Chevron mentioned, this is for both of you, I've heard Chevron mentioned a couple of times. And I appreciate the fact that, they're a large taxpayer, but they're a large corporation. So I'd like to know or have you talk about how you see Richmond investing in the arts and thinking about the arts as a way of generating income in the city. Because I think someone back here made a comment, we don't have to be reliant on large corporations, but it takes a vision from those of you who are leading the city. So I'd like you to talk a little about that and tell me how that might work, how you see art as an investment, if you see it as an investment. Thank you.
I love that question. So I will admit that I am a struggling amateur artist. One of my greatest joys is getting to know the Richmond Art Center. If you're not already familiar with it, it's wonderful whether you identify as an artist or, like me, would just like to do that one day. We have a small but vibrant art community here in Richmond that I'm now have the pleasure of getting to know a little bit about. And we should be a magnet for creatives. I know that we have affordability issues here, but relative to other areas in the Bay Area, other communities, we still have a tiny corner of Richmond with affordable space that can be used for housing and for studios. And I love the idea of the city council, working with the staff to build a department or a program to help entice artists to the area and scaffold them and help them get established. One of the sad moments of Richmond is when Pixar decided to decamp and go to Emeryville. So before my time in Richmond, but it's, when you think about stuff like that, I feel today we can have those sorts of creative, small creatives and large creatives coming here and rediscovering the city if we do a better job of marketing it to folks, which again, I'm concerned that we don't. I also feel the same way about parks, by the way, like art and parks. Like these are two things that we have here that people don't realize that make us a world-class city and should really start being promoted, I think, as part of that you can live a good life in Richmond. I feel like I do, and I want others to do the same.
So I'm also the former director of people and culture for SF Jazz. And so as a former musician, if you will, but I think the arts are super important. The arts, for me, growing up in the East Shore area, learning how to play the drums, taking the arts classes, here in the city of Richmond, were things that I enjoyed. It provided opportunity for me to learn more about others in the community who were artists. In addition to that, I think there are parks here that we could really use to be interpretive, where we could display the arts of those that are in the schools from the Bay Area, but also as working as a liaison with our West Contra Costa Unified School District, as well as the arts colleges here in the Bay Area, and bring them here to do commission work, to show what we can do in our communities, and rotate it throughout the entire city so that it will attract not only folks from outside of the city of Richmond, but our neighbors to West Contra Costa County, and find out who the superstar artists are within our very own city of Richmond. Prior to deciding to run for this seat, I was asked to join the Arts Commission because of the great art that I have in our house here in Richmond that's been collected for years. So I get it, I understand it. It is a matter of, it's a way to engage, it's a way to connect with the community. It tells a story, it's interpretive, and it becomes a voice of the people in a much more rich and holistic way.
Thank you. I'd like to go to a couple of Zoom questions. We're on Zoom tonight. And I guess I'll start with Ahmad. It's your turn. I live on Carlson Boulevard, which frequently has people driving 10+ miles per hour over the speed limit and has had numerous accidents, cars hitting pedestrians. They say the only time I see anyone pulled over by police is El Cerrito PD. What will you do to make our streets safer for pedestrians?
Well, I think one of the things that there's two streets that just really pop out. It's Carlson near San Jose, right past Central. And then you come to about Columbia, and it's NASCAR. From the time the light turns green from Nation's Burgers there till they get to about Columbia. I don't think that the orange flags are working. They haven't been working. We've tried to collaborate with the city of El Cerrito to cut back on the trees there in that area because you can't see, and so you're actually edging out of the streets there. I know our pastor here, the church, has to edge out from his street to get here. I believe there needs to be engineering involved. This has been a discussion in 2020, and still nothing is done. I believe the average is maybe every 2 months there is either an accident or a near miss in those communities. That needs to be addressed now. And there needs to probably be another light between Central and right at the freeway there up the off ramp. There needs to be a slowdown. I don't think that, and this is just me, that the kind of street design, if they have in other places, would be a deterrent. It may slow down, but there's also the aesthetics of the community that you don't want to take away. But it should not be used as a thoroughfare when 80 or San Pablo are backed up.
I think of all the issues, this is probably the one at which we're most aligned. I completely agree with everything Mr. Anderson said, that Carlson Avenue is a death trap. It's too fast. It's ugly, or at least where I live in the annex, there's weeds. I know of at least 3 deaths, car-related deaths there in the last year. There was a woman who died crossing it a couple of years back over by us. And I do think there are engineering solutions that slow speeds on roads. And I am frustrated that we have not had success in having that. I know many people in the community have raised this issue before and it hasn't happened yet. So again, when I knock doors, especially along Carlson Avenue, it's the #1 issue that people raise. When you ask them, one of my questions is, what would you do differently in Richmond? The #1 answer is fix Carlson Avenue. And so I tell people, like when I ran for office, I didn't have my #1 item on my platform being fix Carlson Avenue, but it is close to the top now, certainly in my top 3, because I'd be a fool not to, like when so many people are in agreement that it's very much negatively affecting their lives, and the safety of our community, we need to do better. And so I do think there's engineering solutions. There's actually a plan out there. Somebody actually, I think I see in the audience, somebody gave me a copy of this plan. There's beautiful diagrams of ways they call it a road diet, instead of 2 lanes, it can be 1 lane. It could have a sheltered bike lane. There's things you can do to make it a slow street. As someone pointed out, like San Pablo is not terrifying, but Carlson, just the design of it is a highway. So anyways, I completely agree. It's a problem and we need to do better.
Okay. Sue, it's your turn to go first this time. From the audience here, between 25 and 30% of Richmond youth have asthma, which is double the rate of the state overall. To what extent do you think Chevron is responsible for this problem?
So not last week, and the weekend before, for Clean Air Day, the city put on a presentation about asthma, and I went to get educated about it. I'm fortunate myself to not have asthma, and my child also does not have asthma, but I'm well aware from doing work in Richmond how many kids do. One of the things that I learned, I'm going to try to say this quickly and accurately, is that asthma has many causes, but a main cause is a particular kind of particulate material called 2.5 PM or PM 2.5. Richmond has a lot of it, and 67% of our PM 2.5 is traceable to Chevron. So yes, cars are a problem. Other businesses put it in the air, but 2/3 of this asthma causing material comes from Chevron. So yes, we can hold Chevron responsible for the high asthma rate we have in the city. And once we're done pointing fingers, it points to a solution, which is if we want our kids to not have asthma and our adults. I just had a conversation with an adult man who moved to Marina Bay and his asthma is terrible. Marina Bay is one of the hot spots for PM 2.5 coming from Chevron. It lands at Marina Bay. He didn't know that when he bought his house. We need to have higher emission standards on Chevron. My understanding is Cal EPA has raised emission standards. BACMAD is expected to enforce those. I will be right there cheering along as they do because, you know, we need to have the cleanest air possible if we want to make that statistic not the terrifying statistic it currently is about childhood asthma.
Go ahead, Adman.
Yeah, so my mom was director of public health nursing for over 25 years here. I've been an asthmatic all my life. It's not just the emissions, but I think it's a combination of also the constant exposure that you go through. Having been born on South 17th Street, South 18th Street, I think Bay Area quality has certainly gotten better, but we need to improve standards. I mean, it's one thing to take on Chevron, get more money from Chevron, but we need to move Chevron along. And we need to figure out ways that we can move to cleaner air, cleaner energy, and partner with those organizations and companies. Unfortunately, Moxion is gone, SunPower is gone, but what do we do next? What does that plan look like? And I think that's the direction we need to move. My asthma, as you hear my voice now, as the weather's changing, is impacted. And again, those individuals, the Black and brown communities, because over the years, that's where we have allowed folks to build. The land was cheap. We had enterprise zone. You didn't have to pay taxes until they made money. And they also provided jobs. So we went for the jobs all the time. The land and the community was deteriorating. And I'll tell you, you know, as it becomes a concern, it became more of a concern when folks who were living in much of the more the affluent communities were being impacted as well. I've lived here all my life and no one was crying SOS or help then. But now I'm glad we're all on the same page and moving the same direction. But I want to see some action. What is the move to be able to move towards a healthier community other than just getting money, other than boycotting? What other action plans and who are we partnering with to do that?
Okay, I'm going back to a Zoom question. For you, Ahmad, you keep mentioning economic development. What do you mean by that?
If one looks up the definition of economic development, and it's not Ahmad's definition, you can AI it now, but it is the engine that provides economic development, tax revenue for your city. When you bring cities here, they pay taxes. When you talk about Chevron, they pay taxes and more taxes. That money, as we've just been explained, and I think that needs to be explained to folks who live here, that money provides services to provides money for staffing. It provides money for folks who work here that then go out and take care of your streets, your potholes. It provides money for health, wraparound behavioral health services and crisis management team and your law and order and your fire. That's what makes your city sparkle. In addition to that, it also is a way to conduct the engagement that you need with your communities. It is also a way to build homes here and the money that you receive from that, for the revenue. And we have a crisis for housing. We have a homeless crisis, an unhoused crisis. It provides services to address those needs day in, day out. That's what economic development's about. As the chair, I brought the East Bay Economic Development Agency here under Steve Bader. He met with us to talk about like cities that are having challenges before and after the pandemic. What can we do to not only retain the business we have, but help them thrive here in our community? What can we do to bring city businesses here that are in other cities, such as the ports that are closing, the wharfs that are closing, businesses that are closing that are too high in the city of San Francisco and Oakland? Can they work here? Are we open for business here? That's economic development.
Go ahead, Sue, if you'd like to answer. You're free to.
but the question was what Ahmad means by economic development.
Well, you could interpret it if you'd wish, your vision.
Okay, my vision of economic development. My vision for the economic development of Richmond is that we are, as a city, overly dependent on our largest taxpayer which is Chevron, for our revenue. I do think, though, by increasing the taxes on Chevron and having the extra 550 million over the next 10 years, that gives us a unique opportunity to make the moves that we as a city need to make to diversify our economy and diversify our tax base. So I think that's something that maybe I haven't said tonight, but I want to make clear that I am aware that having Chevron as our largest, by far, contributor to our revenue stream is problematic and unsustainable, particularly because I believe fossil fuels are not sustainable and are problematic. And so I really want to see a robust plan using part of the additional revenue that we have to market Richmond to green energy providers, because I think there's a certain elegance in lowering our reliance on fossil fuel taxes by diversifying towards new energy sources that are non-polluting. And I know some of the businesses, the green businesses, including Moxion, that have come in are closed. It's disappointing, but I'm not discouraged. Not every business is going to sail off into the stratosphere, but we got to keep punching away at it. We got to do more to make sure that the infrastructure of our city is ready for business. I think there's huge opportunities at the port. We haven't really talked about, no questions about the port tonight, but I'm excited. We've got a deep water port in Richmond, one of the few cities on the West Coast that can say that. And we underutilize this resource. I recently found out that some of the port facilities, they're used as a junkyard. Like most of the businesses there don't even take advantage of the water. So we have all sorts of opportunities. And I think we do and can do better now that we're not broke all the time.
Thank you. Does anyone want to raise their hand, or I can keep with my cards?
First of all, we know that Sue Wilson's our PA. Now, I got a question now, you talked about these green jobs. Now, you think you're going to replace Chevron with all these green jobs. Now, I'd like to know what type of green jobs you're going to be in to take the place of Chevron. Because the bottom line is you will never do away with fossil fuels. But what I'm worried about, Chevron goes, Richmond goes, and we need to know what kind of green jobs is going to take the place of Chevron paying in the revenue. But you haven't, the RPA, the city council hasn't made it clear what type of jobs is going to take the place of Chevron.
So I do think that we are, as a society, going to replace fossil fuels with clean energy. And I know you can shake your head, and I know I'm not going to convince you, but I think it's going to happen. And I think that we're not going to find a single employer that's going to take the place of Chevron. It's not going to be a giant business, but I think that we can find a collection of green energy businesses that put together can replace the revenue that we have from Chevron. I will give you an example. There is a lot of excitement in California about offshore wind, about developing these turbines as a way to bring in energy. And you're scoffing, but anyways, it's, I'll just continue. It's real. Like, we can have offshore wind energy, and Richmond is not going to have the windmills, the turbines right off of our shore, but we can be a place that helps service and support the communities that do have those. We should explore that. And it's just one example. I'm an optimist. I actually think that we're going to have green energy in the future, and I think Richmond should be part of it rather than left behind.
Go ahead, Ahmad, please.
So, thank you. Yeah, so you look here, I've said it, we can't, and I agree with Sue, we cannot depend on Chevron to bring us through the fog, if you will. If those are who you're thinking of, that it reminds me of the Temple of Doom, and Indiana Jones has a skull here, and he has the bag of sand here, and he's trying to weigh out which one is going to be enough so he can just grab the skull. If we take that approach as Indy did, when he grabbed the skull and put the sand down, he smiled for just a second before the temple started crumbling. We need to think of other options that will work, and that's real. I agree with Sue. I mean, it's sad that Moxion is gone and SunPower is going where they are, but there are 5 other places, other organizations or companies like Moxion that we should be having dialogue to see how that goes. I also believe in time that the work we're doing collectively here in this city, pushing back is important. I'm not with the turbines. I'm with, in Eureka, they have the space and the sea area there to be able to, along the coast, to do it. But they're also building schools and training folks on how to work on those turbines. I think we need to work with our community college and our unified school district to train our folks. Otherwise, we bring folks in and they're just doing the work. And we don't want to do that because those are special technicians. The other thing is the Coast Guard has issues about maneuvering through this area as well with the turbines, because they've talked about that. The Audubon Society and the birds, we know Livermore, they've had those issues and they manage that. But there's also the sea animals and fish and species that are impacted by the disruption as well. But I'm optimistic. If it's not that, develop the skill sets that can be able to hire folks in those areas, but we continue to drive in that area. You know, there will be pushback from Point Richmond. You know, there'll be pushback from East Richmond Heights, because that's not what they paid to see. And you know, we will get pushback from Sausalito and San Rafael, looking across at that. So those are the things we plan for, and collectively we should work together to address that as a community as a whole to do better for the city of Richmond.
Okay, I have a written question from the audience. I'll start with you, Ahmad. Are you running to serve as a district council member or as a Richmond City Council member elected by the voters of District 6?
Never was a fan. District 5, District 5, District 5. Come alive in District 5. No, I'm running. Look, I'm in District 5, but I vote on city issues. My focus is to be a voice here, but to be active listening in other places. I've strongly recommended that one, you know, like we have the neighbor to neighbor programs and recently focus groups, that next door, since we're neighbors, let's be friends. So if you are aligned next to your city council person, you should meet with them or ask to work with them and bring your neighborhood councils together to talk about issues that impact one another as you're right next to one another. So Point Richmond and the marina, and for along the lines of cutting. So I see it as a holistic representative and not just a district representative. I think city council people in other areas, not necessarily here, but we've seen in other cities, they hide in their districts. They appease their districts. And so they don't have to respond as long as they have it going on, if you will, there. But you lose sight of the common goal. And this is to improve the overall quality of life in your city. Because there's issues of Prologis in Hilltop. There's issues of theft in East Richmond Heights. There's issues across the city about a small business, 23rd Street, trafficking issues there, crime there. It is a holistic perspective. You don't break up your police department. You don't break up your services. You approach it head on and address the priorities as a whole.
Yes, of course. I see myself as running for the Richmond City Council, even though I'm running specifically as a representative of District 5 as well. I actually was an opponent of districting. At the time and to this day, I actually prefer at-large elections. The benefit of the main benefit I see of redistricting is it does make the cost of participating in an election lower, and that lowers the barrier of entry so that more people can run for office. That's positive. But the sort of real intent behind redistricting was to, those of you who know, we were sued by, there's an attorney that goes up and down the state and sues cities You either have to go into redistricting or battle him in court. And if you battle him in court, you're probably going to lose because that's been the pattern. Although a city did recently resist and win. And the intention behind it's good. It's to have racial diversity, to have city councils that reflect the racial diversity of the citizens. But to be honest, Richmond was already doing a pretty good job of that even before we redistricted. I do think there's a real threat in a district system that, sort of as Mr. Anderson alluded to, is that people can just care about the things that their constituents in a particular corner of the city care about. The good news in Richmond is, number one, especially District 5, relatively diverse within the districts. And so if you care about what Richmond District 5 cares about, you end up hitting most of the issues that are important to everyone in the city. So traffic safety is our issue, but it's also a citywide issue. Pollution, citywide issue. Rent control and affordability, citywide issue. So I'm cautiously optimistic that I and whoever is and Mr. Anderson, if he's elected, or whoever takes these seats, will have that citywide perspective. But it's a good question to ask because there's a real risk there.
All right, for both candidates, and we can start with Sue, I believe we're on. What plans do you have for programs for youth and elderly in the community?
Yes. I don't mean to be repetitive about this talking point, but because we are no longer broke, because we have raised taxes on the largest corporations and have a more robust revenue stream, we have opportunities to provide more and better city services. We, especially for youth, like we passed a measure in 2018, I think, that earmarks a certain percentage. I'll probably get the number wrong. I'm going to say 3% of the city budget for youth programs. So that number is about to jump up, I think, by 1.6 million per year because of our additional revenue stream. And so this is a great opportunity. I think that more of the youth programs need to be co-located with the schools. I think there's excellent programs, but that require transportation a lot of the time. And especially at some of our schools that are, struggling. Hopefully you are familiar with the situation of the Stige closure and the relocation of those kids. There's real opportunity the city has there to go in and provide wraparound services, starting with those schools that are in the most challenging circumstances. We have some lovely senior centers in District 5 or a lovely senior center, though I guess the other ones are not. I'm getting my district boundaries mixed up. But the programs there can also use a boost in additional staffing to help with that. All of these things, require staff, and that takes money, but I think we have more money now and we should put it to use in those ways.
Go ahead, Ahmad.
Well, we don't have the money yet. That's 2025. I'm hoping that we will hold to our words to do that. As a person that worked as a parent-teacher student association president when one of my children went to McClymonds High School, I wrote a grant for Since We're Neighbors, Let's Be Friends. And that program dealt with the wraparound services that were provided for McClymonds. The focus, as they were a great school around athletics, the focus was about math, it was about technology, it was about reading, but it also an opportunity for them to be connected to another program that I worked in, was the East Oakland Youth Development Center. At the East Oakland Youth Development Center, those folks in very similar challenge areas of the community as we had were able to not only get the academic support, but the support from counseling as they were becoming young teenagers, also working to develop their skills. They went to China, they went to Washington, D.C., they went on a college tour as well to provide the opportunity for them to have the exposure of what life would be like when you develop those skills, giving them hope, increasing their aspirations and motivations, and encourage them to be all they can be. I have those 13 other years that I worked for the University of California at Berkeley as an academic advisor in the College of Letters and Science. I sat on the Black Recruitment and Latinx Retention Committee as well, and sat as the Academic Policy and Procedures Committee as a Dean's representative. I've visited these communities. I've worked with the youth. It's something I'm familiar with. And I'm more than willing to increase the programs like they did back in the day with Kids First and now with First Promise. I think it's important. I think it's critical to think about not just the here and now, but the there and then when it comes to our youth and working with our elders. For I am 64, and I know the value of what it means to thrive at that age today.
Thank you. I'd like to do another Zoom question, and we'll start with you, Ahmad, first this time. This is testing my knowledge being a newcomer to Richmond, but the person is asking, what are you going to do to stop the planned expansion of the Trans-Montaigne terminal, the port terminal, forgive my pronunciation. Residents in Marina Bay and Point Richmond are not going to benefit from increased train traffic, large trucks going through the neighborhood. They point out it's bad for Chevron to pollute as well as others to do so too.
So totally against that. We need to, the expansion with any business, we require environmental impact report. In addition to that, working with California Environmental Quality Agency as well to ensure that they're held responsible. It is the reason why they've been allowed to do what they do, because we also, the city, have shirked on our responsibility to hold them accountable. We then followed up with them to then cover the tarps of the trains, if you will, to make sure that that was not being put out in the air. The Bay Area Quality Control does register that and is able to be able to determine if it is exceeding or meeting the standards. And I wouldn't support that. I mean, you know, not just, especially in that area, we not only have the trains going through there, but we have the trucks going through there. And it's not just emissions that we deal with toxics. It's also about the exposure. And here we talked about the gentleman down in Marina with asthma and what that like is them for them as well. That's a big priority for the Marina Bay folks. And we need to go back, hold them accountable, align with what the folks want there, but also align with what the quality of health should be in our community. And that's a no for me.
Right. So the Trans-Montaigne expansion is interesting because I think that we probably as a city need to do some revisiting, particularly in the Marina Bay area, but probably parts of the South Side too. Areas that we once considered to be industrial areas have been sort of incrementally converting into residential areas. And I don't think that necessarily the regulations and sort of governing practices that we have for those areas have necessarily been updated. And so I do think we need to look specifically at the expansion of this one business, but I think we need to also step back and look at what standards we should be holding all the businesses operating in that area to, given that it's an incredibly dense with residential, you know, it's a housing dense area. And so, so it seems like a terrible idea to have a lot of polluting traffic, anywhere near. And also I also look forward to getting sort of the environmental impact reports, which I think will tell us more about how serious a problem that's going to be.
Thank you. Well, the time has flown by very quickly. We're at the point where the candidates will have a 2-minute, 2-minute closing statement. Apparently they're eager to get out of here now. Sue, keeping with the theme of the alphabet, you'll get to go first for your closing
my
remarks.
closing statement. I just wanted to really thank the hosts tonight. I am very, I've not been in Richmond as long as Mr. Anderson, but I've been here close to 20 years. And one of the bright spots and one of the things that I can see improving is that we now have a nascent cadre of journalists and reporters and outlets covering us and shining light on our issues, asking both of us pointed and specific questions about policy. We haven't always had this in Richmond. And when you don't have that, I think it creates a situation where there can be a lot of disinformation and a lot of tension and misunderstanding that we as a community don't need. So in addition to my standard thank you for hosting us at this event, I really want to flag the fact that those of you who are here planting, not just planting those seeds, but reviving those seeds. Like, I want to acknowledge that we've had a history of strong journalism here, but it hasn't lately always been supported. So I find that very touching. Those of you who came out on a Tuesday night during dinner time, our reaction was just, it's not that we didn't enjoy the process. It's just, it's not that easy to answer all these questions. So we're a little tired. Again, thank you so much for coming out.
All right. See, that's how tired we are. It's not drop the mic, it's pass the mic. Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, Sue's right. You know, we enjoy one another. I think one of the things that folks have said, you know, how would I, you know, get along with someone who supports the RPA? If you've seen, and Sue can verify, that when we've been on the panel, I've been sitting next to Melvin and we're joking, we're having a good time and really respecting each other for the work that we're doing for the city of Richmond. I'm an HR person. I have to get along with folks every day. Some folks I wish just did not come to work, but they come and I have to shirk it off and be ready. But that's the role and responsibility, to meet people where they are. I think it's about active listening. I think I'm appreciative as Sue, to hear the journalists here today. I grew up with a time when people said, I asked the people in the marina, I said, what did people say when you said you lived in the marina? They said, where was that? They said, Richmond. And that's recently. And they went, oh. I lived in a time where all they did was talked about Richmond and Pittsburgh of being the places that were the worst. I'm here to provide a new voice, a representation. We talked about districting. The reality is the city was approached by leaders in the city to look at the representation in District 5. It was ignored by the RPA. And this, what you're sitting in, which is the south sides over there, this also was District 5, and they carved it out. So when you talk about representation, that was a representation of African Americans. Richard Griffin lived across the street from me where my mother lived. Livingston lived here, your former mayor, and Nat Bates all lived in the same South Side. We don't have that representation on the city council anymore. But I'm here for we the people, because it's we us together that makes a difference. And I'm here to represent you, your voice, when you need me, in the morning and at nighttime. And that's what I'm about. District 5 come alive with Ahmad Anderson for Richmond City Council.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank the candidates for joining us this evening, and thank you all for coming out. Have a great evening.